Well, thank you all for coming. It's really nice to have you all here, and I've really been looking forward to this afternoon, and I hope you don't mind it's a small group. It's, this is just the nature of what we do, I think. It doesn't draw the masses. But it's really nice to see you here, and I also need to say that there are a few people who've sent their regards and have said they would love to be here but can't. And that's Anna Fuchs, Else Lasker-Schüler, Richie Robertson and Barbara Hahn. It would have been wonderful to have them, but they couldn't come. Before I do anything else, as Catherine was saying, I should be thanking the Bithell Trust, whose part funding the event, and the other part of the funding comes from AURI, which is the AHRC-funded Open World Research Initiative, and we have a big project on the relationship between languages and communities, and so the work we do on the German Jewish communities fits in there. So, by way of introduction, I just wanted to give a very short overview, just a few words on the area in which we research. So I think to a certain extent the reason we're all here is that for a long time research into Jewish culture, Jewish literature in German-speaking countries has been dominated by research into canonical male authors. And literary histories, especially where the pre-First World War period is concerned, the homogeneous, has presented long lists of male writers, punctuated only by the occasional female author. I think the picture is slightly different when you look at the 1920s. There are more women writers there that have gained a bit more, prominence. But since the mid-1990s, the picture really has been changing, and even before that, Florian's book on the Topos of the schöne Jüdin was really important in sort of directing people's interest towards the Jewish women. But of course, that was a book on Jewish women and their representation rather than on the literature produced by them. So one important point of reference in the history of research into Jewish women's writing is the volume of collected essays which published in 1994 by Inge Stephan and Sigrid Weigel, Jüdische Kultur und Weiblichkeit in der Moderne. And that was meant as an attempt to investigate a specifically female Jewish culture, traces of which, as Weigel wrote at the time, are lost in the process of cultural historiography since the salons of Henriette Herz and Ralph van Hagen. And that really was a new departure, I think, and it was in part an answer to concerns raised in 1991 by Marian Kaplan. She was really concerned that we're only hearing half the story, and she pointed out that ignoring Jewish women was leading to the misrepresentation and distortion of the image of German Jewish cultural history as a whole. At the same time as editing this volume, Sigrid Weigel, as you probably all know, was also putting in a research proposal with the aim to consider, I quote here, to consider the correspondences and crossovers between the study of women's experience of literature and Jewish culture in modernity. Now, guess what happened? She didn't get any funding. So she didn't do this study. And yet, still, this area of research did gain in importance. And 13 years later, when Andrea and I hosted our conference on German Jewish writers here at the IMLR, things had already changed considerably. There were not just one, but two books on the Jewish New Woman by then have been published, and in the area specifically of literary history, there was a number of important single author studies. and in some cases even whole batches of single author studies on writers like Else Lasker-Schüler, Weser Canetti, Gertrud Kolmar. Exile studies gathered momentum too, and the online Jewish Women Archive had been launched in the US with the historical encyclopedia, which really has some good stuff on. It's worth looking at. And I think, for me certainly, most importantly, Barbara Hahn had published her really conceptually interesting and wide-ranging book, Die Judenpalais Athene, in which she traced the cultural history of German Jewish women from the mid-18th century into the post-Second World War period. So really much in the way that Sigrid Weigel had proposed earlier. But hers was not a literary history, and so I think there's still a lot of work to be done, especially in the literary history. Encyclopedias like those by Renate Hoyer and Andreas Kircher have really done a lot to contribute to filling in the picture, and so has recent work on Elsa Bernstein, Anna Gmeiner, in the area of exile studies on Kindertransport fiction, and I suppose the volume that resulted from our conference here has also done its bit in this, because there were chapters not only on Canetti, Kolmar, Masha Kaleko, so the better known writers, but also on people like Clara Blum, Ulla Wolf-Frank, Ruth Landshoff-York, who still aren't that well known really. And yet there's still much work to do if we want to capture the variety and the wealth of Jewish women's writing and their contribution to the cultural history of German-speaking countries. So this is what this afternoon is devoted to, and of course with this special focus on early 20th century going into the writing in exile from the Nazi regime. The authors we're going to speak about today were essentially members of the highly assimilated Jewish middle classes, the German Jewish Bildungsbürgertum. And to a certain extent it's a self-selected group, and perhaps this is inevitable, for as Barbara Hahn pointed out, in the 19th and the early 20th century, women adhering to the traditional and orthodox Jewish culture and belief system did not tend to publish. So of course there are exceptions, but it is something worth reflecting upon. And again, I think we need to be aware that maybe we're still only considering a part of the voices that could be heard. I think it's just worth keeping at the back of our minds. And so with this in mind, it makes sense to me to start the day with a view from the outside, as it were, with a look at the highly assimilated Western Jewish woman from the position of Zionist discourse, before we turn to the literature produced by German Jewish women themselves. And so I would like to introduce Dr. Anna-Dorothea Ludewig. She's a lecturer and researcher at the Moses Mendelssohn Center for European Jewish History at the University of Potsdam. And she's been working on a number of absolutely fascinating projects, all of which she concluded with edited volumes of essays. They include topics like stolen art and restitution, which was initially published in 2007, but there was so much going on in the meantime that it was worth re-editing and republishing the volume in 2014. Art collectors, sponsors and dealers in Berlin, Jews and Judaism in the detective novel, and most recently, with a volume that came out in 2015, Orientalism, Gender and the Jews. And she's also published a monograph on Karl Emil Franzos in 2008. And her current research project is entitled Jüdinnen Bilder and is concerned with literary and visual representations of Jewish women in European cultural history. And I think we're going to hear something from this ongoing research, which is very nice. So, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much. for the invitation and the kind introduction. And I first of all I want to excuse for my very German English, but I decided to give most of the quotes in German, and I have the translation here so that you can read it in English or German, just as you like. But I don't want to quote Hazel, for example, in English. Okay, so I start with Bertolt Feibel. In 1901, Bertolt Feibel published an article on the Jewish family in the important Zionist magazine Die Welt. The essay made it to the front page, where the reader was encouraged to contribute to the discussion. Actually, the aim of Feibel's article was not to initiate a general debate on the Jewish family, but on the Jewish women. In particular, as Feibel wrote, on the Jewesses from Berlin, Paris, Vienna, and their sisters from the smaller cities. He then writes about the public image of the Jewish women in general, showing surprise that Jewish women's reputation has gotten worse, quoting non-specific but obviously anti-Semitic sources. Es sind schwere Vorwürfe, die gegen die Jüdin erhoben werden. Sie ist die Vertreterin der krankhaftesten Moderne, die Trägerin der laxen und sündhaften Ehe-, Familien- und Gesellschaftsmoral. Sie schädigt die Sitten und den guten Geschmack. Feibel is not content with paraphrasing the anti-Jewish pathologization of women. Rather, he joins the incrimination. In his opinion, the reason for this negative image is not rooted in the increasing anti-Semitism at the time, but in the Jewish woman herself. Die Zeiten haben sich zum Schlechteren verändert und die jüdischen Frauen mit ihnen. The times have changed for the worse and the Jewish women along with them. His argumentation culminates in a differentiation between Western and Eastern and good Western and bad Western Jewish women. Die jüdischen Frauen des Ostens haben die Wohltaten der Emanzipation nicht genossen, sind darum aber auch um ihre ureigensten Schätze nicht betrogen worden. Auch in Westeuropa gibt es, Gott sei Dank, brave und treue Jüdinnen genug. Aber ein großer Teil der Westeuropäerinnen, viele, viele Tausende, ist bereits angekränkelt von der Entartung. Und die Krankheit greift von Tag zu Tag mehr um sich. Feibel has obviously adopted a racial misogyny. The Western Jewish woman suffers from degeneracy, and she is a contagious patient who endangers the whole community. Help is urgently needed, but the disease is self-inflicted and the patient unreasonable and hard to control. Es ist Arbeit im Kleinen, die jede dieser Frauen vollführt. Und doch will uns scheinen, dass dem Nationaljudentum von Seiten dieser Frauen eine weit größere Gefahr droht, als von Seite der männlichen Vertreter der Assimilation. Diese Frauen werfen nicht nur selbst die Ideale des Judentums von sich und damit allgemein menschliche, nicht nur werden sie selbst immer äußerlicher, haltloser, oberflächlicher, entjudet oder, wenn man will, jüdisch-antisemitisch, sie zerstören neben ihrer eigenen Individualität auch die Persönlichkeit ihrer Männer, ihrer Söhne und vor allem ihrer Töchter. The traditional image of the Jewish mother as the key figure of the home, the source of love and warmth, but also, importantly, of children's first religious knowledge, has changed completely, and a distorted picture is presented instead. The resemblance between anti-Semitic and Zionist diction is striking. It's a male perspective on a female environment, but it is also a Zionist male perfidiousness. It can be assumed that Feibel's text reflects the prevailing view within the Zionist movement around 1900, because the author was not just anybody, but one of the most influential Zionist intellectuals. He was a close friend of Theodor Herzl, and at the turn of the century, he held the editor-in-chief position of Die Welt and was co-founder of the Jüdische Verlag, the Jewish publishing house in Berlin. What was the motive behind Feivel's prominently placed article, or, to put it another way, is racial misogyny to be seen as a leitmotif of Zionism? I have to take one step back to answer this very delicate question, or to try to answer it. The Zionist movement was connected with a wish for and the idea of equality, religious, political, and also gender equality. In the beginning, many Jewish women pinned their hopes on the young and inspiring movement. The establishment of a secular Jewish culture and a Jewish state was also of great interest to women. That's why many women's clubs were founded, especially in Germany and Austria. Yet from the very beginning, which means the first Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897, Theodor Herzl revealed his perspective on the role of women. They are very welcome, and I quote, as honored guests, but they are not entitled to vote. Many female participants were disillusioned, but what did they expect? Herzl himself was known for his critical attitude towards emancipated women in general. In his feuilleton zur Frauenfrage, published in 1895, he ironically commented on the Austrian women's rights movement and ridiculed the idea of gender equality. Nicht als ob ich dem Geschlechte, welches manchmal unsere Strümpfe stopft, die Fähigkeit abspräche, sich auch mit Hören zu beschäftigen. Wie viele Frauen schreiben Bücher und welche Achtung flößen sie uns dadurch ein, wenn wir nicht zum Lesen gezwungen sind? Ich bin ja kein grundsätzlicher Gegner der Bildung bei Frauen, obwohl ich eine sanfte Unwissenheit stets hoch geschätzt habe. Ein weibliches Wesen, das Näheres über Sesostris weiß und die Spitzen des Himalayengebirges kennt, flößt mir nicht von vornherein unüberwindliche Abneigung ein, wenn es sich nicht verpflichtet glaubt, diese geistigen Vorzüge durch Sommersprossen aufzuwiegen. Aber denken Sie doch nur, welche Zustände Platz greifen müssten, falls die Frauen, die ohnehin zum Besserwissen neigen, einiges tatsächlich besser wüssten. This essay is neither of cultural nor of Zionist importance, but it shows Herzl's disdain of educated and working or employed women. Yet, in Zionist contexts, he criticized the passive and indifferent attitude of Jewish women. In January 1901, Herzl delivered a speech to the Wiener Zionistische Frauenverein, the Zionist Women's Club of Vienna, in which he took the opportunity to demand that women do more and to also outline his ideal to the Jewish Zionist woman. Was ist die Frau im Zionismus? Nicht eben nichts, aber doch wenig. Und was sollte sie sein? Nicht gerade alles, aber doch viel. What is the woman in Zionism? Not exactly nothing, but also not much. And what should she be? Not exactly everything, but still quite a lot. Herzl went on with a critique of indolent women only interested in coffee table and poker jour. Zionism could strengthen their character on this, and I quote Mark Gelber, prototype of the modern Jewish Austrian princess. The movement will guide her to self-fulfillment and self-improvement and, most importantly, will ultimately help her to be a good or at least better Jewish mother. Herzl's ideal of a Zionist woman is a less educated, loving daughter, wife and mother who is also a good cook. Undoubtedly, and I quote Mark Gelber again, he viewed motherhood unequivocally as the supreme function of women in the world. End of quote. Therefore, raising Jewish children and instructing them in the history of the Jewish people should be their main task in the Zionist movement. But how did this concept of femininity fit in with the young and dynamic movement? First of all, I think that Zionism was a male movement, initiated and run by Jewish men. These men were interested in creating a new Jewish masculinity. And we all know the famous quote by Max Nordau, wir müssen trachten, wieder ein Muskeljudentum zu schaffen. we must think of creating once again a Jewry of muscles. Nordau tried to revitalize the idea, rooted in antiquity, of a strong Jewry, strong mentally as well as physically. Inspired by Turnvater Jan's ideas, he saw the Jewish gymnastic clubs, Turnvereine, like Bar Kochba in Berlin, taking a leading role in the creation and establishment of the image of a new Hebrew. The gymnastic clubs were to help develop the oppressed and humiliated ghetto Jew, the Talmud Jew, into a powerful and self-confident individual. And I quote Max Nordau again, werden wir wieder tiefbrüstige, strammgliedrige, kühnblickende Männer. Let us once more become deep-chested, sturdy, sharp-eyed men. There is no doubt that this Jewry of muscles, and maybe Zionism in general, was about the invention of a new Jewish man, but the woman was of marginal interest. In his study, Unheroic Conduct, Daniel Boyarin analyzes Zionism as a way, or even the way, to overcome the state of effeminate degeneracy, and quotes a very interesting passage from a letter from Sigmund Freud to the pregnant Sabina Spielrein in August 1930. Selbst bin ich, wie Sie wissen, von jedem Rest von Vorliebe fürs Ariatum genesen und will annehmen, wenn es ein Junge wird, dass er sich zum strammen Zionisten entwickeln soll. Schwarz muss er oder es auf jeden Fall werden. Kein Blondkopf mehr. Lassen wir die Irrlichter reinfahren. If the child is a boy, he will or should be a Zionist. The idea of a Zionist girl seems to be beyond comprehension. Zionism is gendered male for Freud, Boyarin notes, and I would go one step further and delete the last two words. Zionism is gendered male! Exclamation mark. I think the thesis of a gendered male Zionism as a way to overcome the state of effeminate degeneracy is of great relevance to the image of the Jewish woman and helps to explain the acceptance and acquisition of not only misogynistic but also anti-Semitic attributes. In contemporary discourses, the relation between Jewish neurosis and erotic compulsions was explained as the immediate consequences of diaspora and assimilation. The Zionist reinvention of a Jewish masculinity should help in overcoming sexual neurosis and curing the male diasporic body. And I quote David Piel. In this nationalist thought, the individual body became a microcosm for the national body politic. To create a new image of the Jewish body became a symbol for creating a new Jewish nation. End of quote. Therefore, a healthy sexuality in Jewish marriages is recommended in various papers and books published in the first few decades of the 20th century. Healthy means modest, passionate, and fertile at the same time. And it's the Jewish women who are responsible for the success of this project of a new Jewish eroticism, because the main Jewish problem was their rejection of the traditional female competencies. For the Zionist movement, working women are less problematic than spoiled wives and daughters, Luxustierchen, luxury animals, and Salondamen, salon ladies of wealthy families. These women are no longer interested in their conjugal beauties. They are artificial and superficial beings, Jewish princesses, predecessors of the Jewish American princes, who are accused of excessive shopping and frigidity by Jewish American men 50 years later. And the image of the Jewish princess leads to my last example, Max Brod. Jewish American princesses, Max Brod's image of Westjüdinnen, Western Jewish woman, seems to anticipate the Jewish American princess in the novels of Philip Roth and others. Brod made his position very clear. Western Jewish girls have a verdorbenen character, They suffer from Nervosität, Gereiztheit, Selbstüberhebung, Verzweiflung, Isolation, nervousness, irritability, conceit, despair, and isolation. In Brod's perspective, degeneracy is a female disorder and the symptoms are very similar to the female disease of fin de siècle, hysteria. Degeneracy and hysteria, these two contemporary diseases, merged in Brod's fictional and non-fictional texts. The suffering of a neurotic society is connected with a pathology of the feminine. Within it, the assimilated female Jewish body is labeled as the Zionist problem, and this blame shifting liberated the male Jewish body. Brod's counterexample is the good Eastern Jewish woman, or the good country woman from the countryside. She's authentic, healthy, hardworking, and has an uncomplicated approach to sexuality. Brod's novel Jüdin, Jewish Woman, published in 1911, is seminal not only for his image of Jewish women, but also for the image of Jewish women in the Zionist movement of Western Europe. The two female protagonists, Irene and Olga, represent the Western and the Eastern type. Irene is the spoiled daughter of a bourgeois family. She was raised in Prague and uses her superficial education to play with Hugo's emotions, Hugo being a naive young man who is devoted to her. According to Brod, Irene represents das Fehlerhafte eines ganzen Menschentypus. All that is wrong with an entire type of person. Olga, on the other hand, is a naturhaftes Landmädchen mit dem guten mütterlichen Instinkt, Trösterin unendlicher Vereinsamungen, Helferin, Retterin. And she's the only Jewish-linked character in this early book. Olga ist eine Tochter Zions, die den Zöchtern Jerusalems gleicht, deren Keuschheit die Bibel preist. An die Zedern des Libanons erinnern sie an patriarchalisches Leben unter Zelten in der Wüste. In Brod's cultural Zionist novel Jüdin, we can find the same ideal of the New Hebrew woman as in Herzl's and Feivel's political Zionist texts. She is not an academically educated, intellectual woman with artistic interests. She's a hard-working country girl, able to give birth to many children and to fulfill the erotic desires of her husband. After all these male statements, one question remains. Did the Zionist women react against these male ideas? Does a female retort or rewriting exist? My talk is just an excerpt of a work in progress, but so far I haven't found a rejoinder from Zionist women. Many women joined in the defamation of their own sex and felt ashamed of their own supposedly inappropriate behavior. An unknown woman who was attending Herzl's speech at the Wiener Zionistische Frauenverein in 1901 felt ashamed because Jewish women didn't do as much as they could or should do, according to Herzl, for Zionism. And Rahel Strauss, the Zionist gynecologist from Munich who traveled around Palestine in 1908, wrote the very interesting report Frauenarbeit in Palästina. Kaum eine der Frauen, die hinübergekommen sind, hat einen ländlichen Haushalt gekannt. Etwas ganz Neues wird plötzlich von der Frau gefordert. Sie werden mir sagen, vom Manne auch. Ja, aber diese Frauen, die da kommen, bringen die Anschauung von Hause mit, dass schwere körperliche Arbeit etwas Erniedrigendes sei. Eine jüdische Frau, die in den Stall geht und Kühe melkt, die den Hühnerhof besorgt, die den Garten bebaut. Das waren für ihre Begriffe ungewöhnliche Dinge. Und plötzlich verlangt man diesen von ihr. In Wirklichkeit hat sie versagt. And Rahel Strauss' impression of women in the cities is much more devastating than of women in the countryside. Die Frau ist durchaus nicht die Gefährtin des Mannes, nicht die Herrin des Hauses. Den Mann adelt sein Lernen und hebt sich weit über die Frau, die gänzlich ohne Erziehung und Bildung bleibt. Es gibt ein derbes Volkswort: Frauen sterben bringt kein Verderben. Dort in Palästina habe ich das Wort verstehen gelernt. Allerdings, die Frau hat wirklich keinen großen Wert, sie leistet nicht viel. Ich glaube nicht, dass allzu viele kochen können, von Nähen und Flicken gar nicht zu reden. Oft hatte ich das Gefühl, hier sollte man einen Besen in die Hand nehmen, um den Frauen zu zeigen, wie man sauber macht, oder Nadel und Faden, um Löcher zu flicken in Tisch und Bettzeug. In der Stadt ist es ja meist nicht die Aufgabe der Frau, verdient gut zu arbeiten. Hier ist es ihre Pflicht, mit Ordnung und Sauberkeit zu sparen und zu erhalten. Und wieder tritt uns das verderbliche Vorurteil entgegen: körperliche Arbeit schändet. Rahel Strauss was not without empathy for the first settlers. She acknowledged the difficulties, but she was also an exacting judge and failed to recognize the struggle of many Jewish women who followed their husbands to Palestine and felt completely lost. There was no mercy for the Western or the Jewish women in general in Zionism, neither from men nor from women. In conclusion, I could provocatively say that the Western Jewish women were blamed for everything. In fact, Zionism had no answer for Jewish women other than contemplating motherhood and keeping house. Women who did not want or were not able to adapt onto this role were maligned, put down and stigmatized as being degenerate. The body of the Western Jewish woman was the symbol of the degeneracy of an assimilated Jewry, the symbol of a secular sin. Thank you.